right. Hey guys. So today what we are going to talk about is the Crusades. Um, and this is just, you are going to watch this video. This is to help you better understand the Crusades and what's important to know. After this video, you are going to be responsible for taking your quick check. So let's talk the Crusades. Hopefully by now you've got a good idea of what the Crusades were. And in summing it up, they were holy wars that were fought mostly between Christians and Islamic empire, because there's not really a Christian empire, remember? So for lack of a better term, Christendom, because it was a variety of countries, and the Islamic empire, which at that time was mostly the Seljuk Turks. But it was Christians versus Muslims. And then obviously there was some impacts on the Jewish community faith as well. So we're going to talk about that. So background, the Crusades, a series of 8 Christian military expeditions that were fought against Muslims for the Holy Lands between the years of 1096 and 1270. So Pope Urban calls for the first crusade in 1095. They don't actually make it to Jerusalem until 1099. Now remember, the Holy Land is Jerusalem. It was an area or a city in Israel, what is modern day Israel, that was sacred to both Muslims, Christians, and Jews for different reasons, but it had meaning to each of those faiths. And Christians were worried that they were not going to be allowed to make pilgrimages to the Holy Land. So that's a big reason why the Crusades start. Around 1095, a new group of Muslims called the Seljuk Turks had taken control of the Holy Land, including Jerusalem, and they were closing it to Jewish and Christian pilgrims. Remember, prior to that, people could travel to the Holy Land. They could travel to Jerusalem, even though it was controlled by Muslims. They just had to pay a higher tax. That was really it, and they're, for the most part, coexisting peacefully. But when the Seljuk Turks take over, they stop the pilgrimages to the Holy Land. They start attacking pilgrims that are coming in. And they were also a threat, and this is important, to the Byzantine Empire. They were backing right up against the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire had not been successful in really holding them back. So the Byzantine Empire is kind of freaking out. The emperor, Alexius, of the Byzantine Empire, reaches out to Pope Urban II and asks for help. He says, this is a Christian war. This is for all of Christianity. It's not just about protecting us politically, even though it kind of was. So he reaches out to the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Now remember, Alexius is part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. He and the Catholic Church, so Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic, were the 2 separate churches now. And that happened because of the Great Schism, where there was that divide between Christianity, and it was the first division in Christianity. So the Eastern Orthodox was the Byzantine Empire, or it's sometimes known as Greek Orthodox today, and they broke apart from the Roman Catholic because they didn't like the way they were worshiping. They were mad about them crowning Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor, but really they didn't believe in the worship of like idols, and they thought the Roman Catholics, with their crucifixes and their depictions of Jesus, were starting to worship idols. And that was the biggest reason they divided. So they're kind of like frenemies now. Like, yes, they're both still Christians. They have that unites them, but they have different rituals, different customs, different practices. So Alexius is the Byzantine Emperor. He is also head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, reaches out to Pope Urban, asks for help. Pope Urban answers the call, and he calls for a crusade. And what he promises them in this crusade, or what he promises them, is that they will have remission from sins, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But causes of the Crusades, or reasons for going on the crusade. 1, to regain the Holy Land. First and foremost, that is what they're telling people the reason for this crusade is to regain the Holy Land. And it was because they wanted Christian pilgrims to be able to go there. You could only get relics, which are things that are related to Christ. So it might be the bones of St. Peter, like his elbow bone, or his pinky bone, or it could be a piece of the cross, or the cloth that they used to wrap Jesus's body. These are all considered relics, and Catholic churches cannot be built without a relic. So that's important because they have to be able to go to Jerusalem in order to find relics, as well as make pilgrimages and pay respects. So for centuries, Christians had visited Jerusalem and other religious sites in the Holy Land. In 1089, the Muslim Turks captured or Seljuk Turks, who were Muslim, captured Jerusalem and refused to allow Christians to visit the shrines. In 1095, Pope Urban calls for European knights to recapture Jerusalem. The second reason for the crusade is to protect the Byzantine Empire. When the Roman Empire fell, the West still stood. This is the Byzantines. We know this. The Byzantine Empire is a Christian empire, and it was being threatened by Muslims. So other Christians, even though they may not always like the Byzantines, are going to feel connected that their faith, their religion is under attack. It wasn't per se, but that is how they are perceiving it, because that is what Pope Urban and others are telling them. The emperor in Constantinople, Alexius, asks Urban for help. Now, bring peace to Europe. There is an underlying cause for this. The Pope figured that if he could unite all the people that had been fighting in Europe, like the French are fighting the English, we've got William the Conqueror and the Duke of Normandy, who was the Duke of Normandy, fighting right before this. You've got people in the Holy Roman Empire fighting. It's everyone in Europe, as the nations are rising and kind of developing their own identities, they are fighting against one another. So the Pope says, hey, if I give them a common enemy, they'll unite together, and this will bring peace to Europe. It'll prevent nobles from making more war on one another. It'll prevent a lot of these territory disputes that we're having. So you know what? Common enemy. Stop fighting each other. Go fight the Muslims in the Holy Land. And this gives people in Europe a common purpose. So now they have a common identity as Christians, but also a common identity as Europeans. Stop fighting amongst yourselves. Go fight in the Holy Land. That's the idea behind that one. Religious reasons. So, and direct quote is, all who die on the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. What is remission of sins? Remission of sins means that he would forgive them all of their sins. And by their sins being forgiven, you get into heaven. So you fight in the Crusades, you go to heaven. And remember, that was the most important thing to many of the people during the Middle Ages, especially peasants who did not live great lives. So this promise, this like get into heaven free card, is going to be amazing for peasants, or the thought of it is amazing to them. The thing on here that says, I asked God for a bike, but I know God doesn't work that way. So I stole a bike and asked for forgiveness. What does that mean? Well, with this free pass that Pope Urban allowed, like, hey, you go fight, you die, you get into heaven free. Well, what that means is people know they're getting into heaven now because the Pope told them, and they trust everything the Pope says. Now, does the Pope have that power? That's a theological debate, but no, you can't really say you get into heaven no matter what you do. So the free pass, what really it allowed crusaders to do was commit horrendous acts of violence against men, women, children that they deemed to be non-believers. And what that meant was they went after especially the Jewish community. It wasn't just Christians versus Muslims. They also went against, it really came to mean anyone who was not Christian, anyone who's not like me. And it gave a lot of the peasants who were not well educated, and a lot of knights who maybe were hungry for battle and hungry for fighting because they wanted to use these skills they had, it gave them a carte blanche pass to commit acts of atrocity against many different people. They were looting, they were raiding villages as they went through. We don't have to pay, we don't have to do anything, we're going to heaven anyway, we're going to fight for God. They used that to excuse their actions. And so there were a lot of horrors that were committed during the Crusades as well, not just in battle, but along the way. Because remember, it takes about a year to get to Jerusalem by land. To gain wealth, a lot of people went to carve out little kingdoms for themselves in the Middle East. They didn't have land in Europe, and so they went to the Middle East and gained land for themselves in the Middle East. Like, I'm the Lord of Jerusalem. I'm the Lord of Antioch, and King of Antioch, King of Jerusalem. A lot of Christians like made their own small kingdoms in the Middle East, or at least that's why they were going to try and do that. A lot of second sons. Merchants want to set up trade with the Middle East. Remember, Jerusalem, the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, all of that is real close to China, real close to the Silk Road. And so they want access to the trade routes. They want access to the goods that are coming out of Asia, silks and spices and all these different things. So they go and they want to get access to trade and bring goods back to sell to people in Europe. Clergymen want to seize religious relics from Jerusalem. I talked about that already. And serfs wanted to escape their lives on manors. So here's a map of the First Crusade. The Crusaders' routes to the Holy Land. It's not a straight line, and it takes many years to accomplish. So a lot of them started in France or the Holy Roman Empire, and they would make their way. Now, they don't have the money to travel by sea. So here, well, I can't really highlight it, but here you see that they almost take like a long winding route. Why didn't they just get in the water over in Providence and then sail over to Antioch? Well, boats are expensive. You have a large army. You need a lot of boats. Horses can't always travel on the boats well, so they had to go by land, and it took them a lot of time. The First Crusade, this is a crusade for personal gain. It was a ragtag army of peasants who rushed ahead of the knights. They were all excited to go. The knights, the trained soldiers, actually took their time and planned and got there. As they marched through Europe, they robbed villages and manors. Most are murdered by other angry Europeans. And then those who made it to Constantinople were slaughtered by the Muslim Turks. The official crusaders were French knights, because another reason for this is there were an abundance of knights in Europe without anything to do. So the Crusades gave them a purpose. When the knights actually arrive in Jerusalem, they are able to recapture Jerusalem. However, thousands of knights die in the process. And they were somewhat lucky in being able to do this. But the Holy Land was then carved into 4 Christian states. Jerusalem, Antioch. Let me see if I can remember. Jerusalem and Antioch. I'll have to look at the other 2. This was a waste of time. The Second Crusade, when the Muslims tried to retake Jerusalem, the kings of France and Germany led a crusade. They never even made it to Jerusalem. Muslim armies that had been divided and unorganized during the Second Crusade now banded together against a common enemy, which are the Christians. And they were able to recapture Jerusalem. The Third Crusade from 1189 to 1192 is perhaps one of the more famous crusades. Even though Christians lost, this was the one that had Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. So it was a much more personalized story. We have heroes of this one and villains of this one, except you have to remember, it depends on the perspective that you take. Was Richard a hero or was he a villain? Was Saladin a hero defending his land? So keep in mind perspective. This is a humiliating crusade. Christians lost Jerusalem. In 1187, Saladin, the Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria, defeated Richard the Lionheart and the Crusaders, then captured Jerusalem. 3 kings led the crusade, so this is often called the King's Crusade. King of France, King of Germany, and the King of England. Richard is King of England. They are all defeated by Saladin. However, Saladin allowed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem. They had to pay a tax. Saladin was a much kinder ruler. In a lot of ways, if you look at this, he was defending lands that they had taken for political reasons, not religious ones. Prior to this, Europe had no interest in controlling the Holy Land for political reasons. But as powers are starting to expand in Europe, they're looking for reasons to expand. And so a lot of this was politics. And keep in mind, the Christians are the ones who start this, not Muslims. Muslims were expanding their political empire. Christians are the ones who attacked first. So you have to keep that in mind when understanding these crusades.
Will you yield the city?
Before I lose it, I will burn it to the ground. Your holy place is ours. Every last thing in Jerusalem that drives men mad.
I wonder if it would not be better if you did. You will destroy it?
Every stone. And every Christian knight you kill will take 10 Saracens with him.
Saracens was the term that they used for Muslim fighters.
That to take this city will be the end of you.
It was the term Christians used.
Your city is full of women and children. If my army will die, so will your city.
You offer terms, I ask none.
I will give every soul safe conduct to Christian lands. Every soul. The women, the children, the old, and all your knights and soldiers, and your queen. No one will be harmed. I swear to God.
The Christians butchered every Muslim within the walls when they took this city.
I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
Then under these terms, I surrender Jerusalem.
Assalamu alaikum.
And peace be with you. What is Jerusalem worth?
Nothing. Everything.
All right, Fourth Crusade. This that clip, by the way, was from Kingdom of Heaven. It is a movie about the Crusades with Orlando Bloom from like 2005. It's actually pretty historically accurate, but it is long and it is rated R for violence. So that was just a clip, but also to show you the differences in how the knights were dressed. Keep in mind that the Muslim fighters are going to be better equipped to fight in the desert because it's what they're used to. Their armor, their weapons, their shields, like all of that was more conducive to fighting than the full gear of the knights, which was like chainmail and heavy metal. And so the knights didn't do so well fighting in the desert like that. Fourth Crusade, comedy. Crusaders never even get to Jerusalem. Half of them decide to invade Egypt, and then they end up in Yugoslavia, which was like the Czech Republic area. The other half actually invade the Byzantine Empire and seize the city of Constantinople because the emperor had recruited them to help him, or a disposed emperor recruited them to help him take the city back because he wanted his crown back. And so they killed the current king of the Byzantine Empire, put this guy on the throne. He never paid them, and so then they sacked Constantinople instead. They were mercenaries, men who fought for money. So this was tragic and insane, but this also severely weakens the Byzantine Empire. The Children's Crusade wasn't actually a crusade, but rather a tragedy. Thousands of poor children, ages 10 to 18 from France and Germany, decided to march toward Jerusalem, saying, "We have faith, so God will help us defeat the Muslims." They actually believed that when they got to the Mediterranean Sea, Jesus was going to part the sea for them and let them cross. He didn't. And so when they got on ships, they were actually sold into slavery. And so many of these children, those who didn't die, were sold into slavery. And this was a tragedy. It was a bunch of teenagers who decided to march to the Holy Land, which gives you an idea of kind of the mob mentality, the trying to do things because they were popular. A lot of them thought, hey, this is what the adults are doing. This is what everyone else is doing. We're going to go. God will protect children more than he will men because we're innocent. And that just wasn't the way the world worked. So Christians believe they are fighting in the name of Jesus to take back the Holy Land. Muslims believe they are defending land as theirs and they are protecting their home from invaders. Who's right? Is there someone who's right? Or is this an example of history, again, where you have to look at both sides of the story in order to understand it? Christians believe they're right. Muslims believe they're right. And both, in a way, are. But you can't understand the full story, the full scope of the Crusades without understanding why each side is fighting. And both sides are right. Christians really were, in a lot of ways, fighting for land that they thought was valuable to them. And Muslims are defending their homeland, defending land that is theirs, and that has been in their control for hundreds of years at this point. We are not going to do Watch Mojo, but if you would like to watch it when this video is over,
when the Pope offers redemption
I will post
through aggression, you know things are going to get ugly.
So what were the impacts of the Crusades? Feudalism is weakened, and this is going to start us down our next set of topics, which are all the decline of feudalism. The knights are not so hot on the battlefield. Their armor doesn't work right. Many serfs are given their freedom, and debt was canceled if they fought. So a lot of them didn't return to the manors. They stopped and settled in towns and cities along the way. And a lot of cities are going to be popping up, but a lot of people determined, hey, I can get a better job in a city and not live a life of servitude anymore. And so they did. With lords and knights away on the Crusades, monarchs are going to grow more and more powerful. So aside from the Third Crusade, most of the kings didn't go on crusade. And with all their nobility gone, they start to consolidate power for themselves. If a knight or a noble dies on crusade, that land now goes back to the king. And so kings are really going to consolidate power here. Constantinople fell to the Muslims. The Crusaders did not save Constantinople. In fact, that Fourth Crusade, where the mercenaries turned on them and sacked Constantinople, is going to leave Constantinople weakened to the point where 200 years later, the Byzantine Empire will eventually fall to the Muslim Turks. And that happens in 1453. And with that, we see the final fall of Rome. A loss of trust. After the Crusades, Muslims did not trust the Europeans. This is perhaps the most important impact and lasting effect of the Crusades. Today in the Middle East, we still have conflict, and that conflict 1,000 years later stems from the Crusades. That sense of trust in, like, we have our beliefs, you have yours, that disappeared, and that's where a lot of the conflict in the Middle East has come from. Now, that's not to say that Muslims, Christians, Jews don't get along in areas of the world. They do, and we know that the best way to bring peace is to understand and accept others that are different from us. But that sense of mistrust in the Middle East especially is still there. Ever since the Crusades, Jews have been victimized in Europe. Now, the Crusades did not begin the victimization of the Jews. This has happened for as long as Judaism has been alive. But it was made exponentially worse, where Christians took the mindset of anyone other or different was bad. And so anti-Semitism rose rapidly, which I know you read about in your reading. This is a huge one as well, and leads to the decline of feudalism. Trade expands in Europe. This is a huge one. Contact with the Middle East ended the isolation of the Europeans. They were exposed to other cultures, Islam, China. Crusaders brought things back like spices and silk. International trading fairs turned manors into small towns, which eventually will become big cities. Shipping expands on the Mediterranean. And navigation and geography and tools related to those become important. So Europe starts to slowly wake up, and they're starting to come alive because travel opens your eyes to the world and allows you to see things that are different from you. And Europe, who had been so long in the dark ages and in isolation, is now having their eyes opened again. And so they're not going to want to give that up. And so Europe kind of reopens. And finally, an interest in the world. After the Crusades, there's a heightened interest in travel and learning throughout Europe. They saw how well-educated people in the Middle East were. They saw the universities in Constantinople, and they thought, why can't we have this? What happened? How did we lose this? They're coming into contact with Greek and Roman artifacts again. And this renewed interest in learning takes hold of Europe. Some historians believe that this has paved the way for the Renaissance. And the Renaissance will come about starts about 200 years after the Crusades. So remember, nothing happens instantaneously, but slowly over time. All right. So hopefully that helps you better understand the Crusades and the impact that they've had on our world. All right. Okay, let's see.